in that space, there was no time, there was no hurry. Um, it was peaceful. It was complete unconditional love, like acceptance, like everything was okay no matter what happened. And I was aware that I was in this accident, but at that point, I don't know that any of it mattered.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Channel Within. I'm Mira, and today I'm delighted to have Tammy Andersen with me. Hi, Tammy, and welcome to the Channel Within.
Hi, Mira. Thank you for having me. I mean, I grew up just, a regular kid in a I was in a suburban neighborhood, on a mini farm outside of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And, had pretty much a normal kid life. I mean, lots of animals, horses, all kinds of stuff, right? Very family oriented. And I started showing horses when I was a teenager, early teenager. And when I was 17, the first horse show of the season, I went into the ring with my horse, came out, and my friend who boarded her horse at my house came over to congratulate me. And I'm standing with my horse, and his head was kind of over my shoulder. That's what he always did after we'd get out of the ring. And she was facing me with her horse. And the next thing I know, I'm floating above my body. So I knew that there was an impact. Um, but I know the story and I saw it happen later. Um, but I wasn't aware of what actually was happening during it. Um, except the whole different experience that I had never been open to. Um, I wanted to be an equine vet, so I was very Western medicine. My Western thought, science, you prove it, and I'm there. And I was baptized Presbyterian, but I wasn't really raised that way. I had friends with various religions, but I we didn't go to church. We didn't, there wasn't that kind of talk. We were very nature oriented. And I was kicked in the face. My friend's horse swung completely around. She was like I don't know, she was a big horse. She was an Anglo-Arab and she was a good, God, was she like 16, 3 hands tall? She was big. She swung completely around. Like people are like, we didn't even know a horse could move like that, right? And kicked, got me on this side of my face. I had a big hoof print and kicked this side, just grazing my ear and hitting my horse. And I went flying my body went flying into the air, almost a body length up, a couple of body lengths back, and then it kind of arched and came back down. And I hit on my head, and my body kind of folded up like an accordion. And um, I ended up floating. I was above my body, a long ways, but yet I could see it like really clearly. Um, and in that space, there was no time, there was no hurry. Um, it was peaceful. It was complete unconditional love, like acceptance, like everything was okay no matter what happened. And I was aware that I was in this accident, but at that point, I don't know that any of it mattered. Um, I did see a tunnel that I was kind of part of. I did see light, and I could hear and see people off to the left, off into the distance. And so I was kind of moving towards them, but at the same time, I was just enjoying the feeling. And I didn't make it all the way to the people. Um, I knew that they were familiar, but I didn't know who they were. I couldn't make them out. And a man appeared before me. Um, and I didn't know who he was. He was in kind of a white robe, and he had these amazing, like crystal blue eyes. Like there's no blue. Like I had never seen such a color before, and I was just sort of mesmerized. And I'd look at him, and he'd look back at me, and he just knew everything. He knew everything. I knew that he like knew me, but I didn't know him. I'm not like gonna say, "Hey, John, how you doing?" I you know, but in that moment, it was okay. Everything was safe. Everything felt right, and I sort of started to motion to the people, and he says, "No, no, 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 no. Hold on." He said, "Let's talk." I went, "Okay." And I'm just looking at his eyes and just like feeling this immense love. And he says to me, "You haven't completed everything that you set out to complete it in this lifetime." And I knew what he meant, but I didn't know what he meant. And I said to him, "You know, I I don't understand." And he says, "Well, you're young. You're only 17, right?" And he said, "You haven't loved enough or allowed enough love in." And I'm like, "What does this mean?" You know, I'm still thinking in human terms, but yet being so, I don't want to, I didn't feel like I was drugged, but I was just so peaceful. It was like the deepest meditative state you can imagine, and it was just so comfortable. And I said, "Well, how does that happen? How do I do that?" And he said, "Well, the choice is yours, but I'm not sure you're ready to come home yet." And I'm looking over to the people, and I'm like, "That's home. I know it's home. I want to go home. I love this." And he's saying, "I really just don't think you're quite ready. And I'm not sure that you're going to choose to come home. This lifetime isn't finished for you." And I said, uh, "Okay." And I was just in the space, and he motions, and I follow his hand, and I look, and I can see me laying there. And my mom, who loved animals, had respect for horses, but was scared of them. And she wasn't into horses. My grandpa, her dad, got us into horses. And she sure never wanted anybody to be showing them. She felt that they were dangerous. They're big. They're they're prey animals. They're not always rational, and she was always afraid somebody'd get hurt. My mom didn't usually go to horse shows. I usually went with another group, or when I was 16 and driving and stuff, my boyfriend and I would go to those shows, and here and there she'd come along. She was at that show, and I saw her standing over my body. And I saw my boyfriend on the other side. And I saw all people gathering around. And I was laying in a pool of blood. And I knew I was dead. It became very obvious. I didn't figure it out until then. And I looked back at this man, and I said, "I'm dead." And he said, "Are you? You don't have to be." And he said, "I just don't feel, when you take everything into consideration, that you're going to choose to come home yet, because you have so many things that you want to accomplish." And I'm like, "I can't leave my mom. She's not going to make it through this. There's no way." And we were really close. I'm the baby, and for one thing, and we were really close. And I just couldn't do this to her. And then the other thing I saw was that my horse took off when he also got injured. His shoulder and neck were injured. And there was a big barn. There were two outdoor riding rings, and then there's this big barn, and there's a field and a highway on the other side of that field. He was in the field and heading towards traffic. And I'm like, nobody knows where he is. And so I went back. I went back. And as I started leaving this man, I realized that I was going back to dark. And I didn't fully understand that. Um, in this place that was so light and so, I mean, there was no dark, there was no duality, there was no gray, there was light. And I knew I was coming back to dark, and I knew there would be pain. Um, but I knew I had to do it. And so I did. I came back into the body and immediately felt this heaviness that is hard to describe. I mean, there was just so much weight. Um, and I'm thinking, going back, I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to be fine. I'll just get up and I can go in the next class. And yeah, that didn't happen. I had some pretty bad injuries. I, as I came to, I said, Mom, what should I do with these teeth? And she goes, Oh my God, you're alive. And I could hear people start yelling, She's alive, she's alive, she's alive. And they had already called, the paramedics were like on their way. They actually happened to be, this was at like a state county fairgrounds, and they actually happened to be there in a different part, giving tours to I think Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. And so they were giving them rides in the ambulance and the fire truck and all that kind of stuff. Well, the ambulance left and came to me. Um, and I said, Should I get up? And I went to get up and I couldn't move. And I was like, Whoa, what did I just do? I don't want to be here. I changed my mind. Um, and obviously I couldn't. And before I knew it, the paramedics were there and securing the neck and everything and whatever. And by that time I could start to move my feet. Um, and I knew I was going to live. Okay. Nobody else knew this. They didn't know what state I was in. And the paramedics are asking me all these questions. I said, I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm going to be fine. They're like, You're not fine. And I'm like, Well, that was rude. But they get me in the ambulance. My mom gets in the ambulance as well. And they're talking to the hospital on the way, and they're saying um, that it was a possible DOA. And I said, Dead on arrival? You've got to be kidding me. I told you. I'll be fine. And they're like, Just relax, just, whatever. I go, My mom's in here. What are you doing? And I'm yelling at the paramedics. And we get to the hospital, and I'm like, I'm supposed to be riding with my vet the next day. Okay, this was on the weekend. I was supposed to be riding with him because I was shadowing my large animal vet, who I absolutely loved. And I'm like, come on, I got to get out of here. I got stuff to do. I've got to make sure my horse is okay. I've got to. And they're like, You're not going anywhere. And so I had head trauma, obviously, and facial trauma, and both joints completely shattered. The mandibular, the large bone completely severed, teeth out, all this stuff. And um, obviously neck stuff and whatever. And her hip broke some ribs, dislocated this because it got stuck in the halter. And, all this stuff. And all I wanted to do was talk about this man and talk about this experience because I had no reference, right? But I knew it was real. I knew it was where I came from. I knew just how profound it was. And they're saying we need to treat this first. We have got to stabilize you. We have to, whatever. We'll talk later. You need to stop moving your face. You need to, so I'm doing that, I'm doing that. So they waited 3 days. I just happened to be in there when one of the best oral and maxillofacial surgeons was on call, which he wasn't thrilled. He was watching a football game. But he had recently been voted like one of the top in, wherever. And he happened to be on call. Yeah, no accident there. And so he's the one who put me back together. And which, great. However, also created a lot of trauma because a lot of the stuff was very archaic and stuff, all the treatments and therapy and stuff I had to go through afterwards. Um, but he's also the one who waited 3 days to do surgery because he didn't think I would live. And they had to make sure that the brain was stable and that there was no swelling or anything like that. And I'm telling him, I'm fine. Let's get on with this. If I have to have surgery, then do it. And he's like, well, you can't do this. And, the ER doctor came up later and said, wow, you really made it. Yeah, I can't fathom that you lived. And nurses coming in, different people from the ER actually came up to see me and they were just shocked. And I'm thinking, it wasn't that bad. Come on. I hadn't seen myself. They kept all mirrors away from me. They wouldn't let me get out of bed until after surgery. And finally, it was the second day. And I'm saying, please, will you listen to me? You have to listen about this story. And the surgeon literally patted me on the shoulder, looked at my mom and said, I really want you to not entertain this. And he said, we're going to call psychiatric, okay, and have a consult. And I said, there's nothing wrong with me. I know what happened. Fine, maybe they'll listen. So psychiatrist comes down and somebody else, some aide or somebody who was with him, a student maybe, and starts interviewing me. And I start talking. And I'm openly wanting to tell people about this, right? And my mom doesn't know what to do with it. And she's still in shock and she's beside herself. And he says to me, okay, we're going to prescribe some medication and some sedative and some blah, blah, blah. There were like three different things. And I went, why? I couldn't fathom why these people weren't listening to this. Like it made no sense to me. And then they wanted to medicate me. Well, that's when my 17-year-old, I've had enough of this came out. And I actually swore at the guy and said, you get out of my room. You're not allowed back in here. And my mom said, it's okay. And she took them and she walked them to the door and said, she does not want medication and I have to back her. And I will support her. And he is, I think, the first one that said to my mom, I think the best for you to do is to remind her that she's a miracle every time she starts going down this path, or you're going to have some real mental health issues on your hands. And my mom says, I don't think she's mentally unstable, but I don't know what's going on. And I can hear this. I'm overhearing this. And she comes back and I said, do you believe me? She says, I believe that something happened. I don't know what to do with it. And I don't know how to help. And that's kind of where the conversation stopped because every time I bring it up, she'd get upset. And there was no way I wanted to add more pain to what she'd already been through. Yeah. So,
Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing that beautiful story, Tammy. It's so lovely that love and peace and a non-duality that exists in that other world or across the veil, yet it's the
right.
same love, like love for your mom that brought you back here. So love is
Yes,
the frequency that exists in both worlds. And
100%.
Yeah, and I am also, struck by the coincidences. So everything that lined up, the paramedics being
Yes.
there, also the surgeon who was not
Yes.
the most, was like a surgeon, thinking with the science mind that this is not real. But
Hmm.
thankfully, like everything lined up for you to get the healing or to get the
Yeah.
surgery required. And so
Right. Right.
yeah, so that's amazing. How long
Yeah.
after? Because you're, first of all, your mom is hearing from an authority in the science field or the medical field to not entertain it while
Right.
believing her child that something happened. So how long after were you able to openly talk about it?
Um, I should back up. I came in open. So I was speaking with spirits. I played with, on our property, I played with a Native American group of spirits regularly. And then I had guides, and I spoke with my grandpa, my dad's dad, who had passed when I was about 2 months old. And so, as well as some others. And I'd name them by name, and I'd say, so and so's here and whatever. And I also started knowing when people would die or they were going to die, and I knew things. And I would say some things out loud here and there. I was very shy um, when I was real young. And I think it was just a matter of learning how to manage energy, energy of other people. And so, anyway, so I was open. But when I got to be about 8, my grandma, my mom's mom, and my mom, especially my grandma, sat me down and said, "We don't do this." Later, I learned that my grandma's mom, so my great grandma, was institutionalized for being psychic, for being an intuitive, and for being a healer. And her sister, um, also, she did things. She read tarot and things, but she did a lot of healings and stuff for people. And yeah, so my grandma was very traumatized by that whole thing. Now, it did come out later that my grandpa, I think, had, his wife, my grandma's mom, institutionalized because he was having an affair. Okay, so it was that whole kind of thing. But my grandma growing up didn't know that. She grew up with her dad, and she didn't know that there was really nothing wrong with her mom and what had happened. So she grew up afraid of it, of afraid of her own abilities, afraid of my mom's abilities, and then very afraid of my abilities. And so I quieted down about everything and didn't share things openly. And it wasn't until I was riding with my large animal vet when I was about 14, 15, and I try to ride with him here and there when we were on breaks or on the weekends or something. And he caught on that I would know what we were doing at the next farm or the next call. He's and I could remember him kind of stopping and looking at me a few times. And then finally he said, "So what are we doing here?" And I tell him, and he said, "Okay, this time I got you." Because I'd be like, "Oh, I don't know. I guess I just looked at the sheet, what we were doing." And he said, "The sheet's not here." He said, "There's no way you could have known that. How did you know it?" And he'd start questioning me, and I just kind of laughed. And so then we'd kind of have this game, but it was only the two of us. That was it. And I would talk to the animals as well, and my horse for one. And so so yeah, I was open. But after the accident, it didn't open me. I mean, it did, and it didn't because I couldn't talk about it. And if I couldn't talk about it to my mom, who was I going to talk about it to, right? And then the surgeon, I had to go back over and over and over and over to his office. And eventually he said to me, "You know that experience that you told me about in the hospital?" And I said, "Uh-huh." He said, "I want you to talk to someone. He's a psychiatrist, And I literally looked at him and said, "F you." I did. I was probably 18 at that time. I was angry because my life had just gotten taken away from me. Um, and I didn't, I think I didn't feel it was fair and all of that. So th there was a lot of hard stuff right after the accident, because I couldn't become an equine vet. That was my dream. That's what I was doing. So I had 1 year left of high school, and I went, "Pff, what's the point?" Right? So anyway, the oral surgeon is a few years later, and he says, no, he studies near what's something called near-death experience. And I said, yeah, I don't want to hear about it. Anybody you're referring me to, I want nothing to do with it. Not about that. Hey, I'm seeing the prosthodontist, I'm seeing the orthodontist, I'm seeing the regular dentist, I'm seeing the um, endodontist, I'm seeing the whatever, everybody you want me to see. I'm not seeing him. I'm going to give you his information. I want you to call him when you feel it's ready. I'm not going to push you into it. He said, but because of your case and a few others, we created what's called the facial pain treatment program. It's the first of its kind, and we have several people on the board. I'm one. Then we have a doctor, we have a physical therapist, we have the psychiatrist. He does things, he studies this, and he does things with meditation and self-hypnosis. And I think it would really help some of the psychological stuff you're going through. And he might have an understanding of what happened to you that I never could have. He said, I didn't know what to make of it. And my protocol was, if it's mental health, you call psych in. He said, I apologize. I am so sorry that I didn't take the time to listen, but your story has always stuck with me. And on some level, I think I knew it was true, but I didn't professionally, I didn't know what to do with it. And we have rules to follow. So I took this guy's name and I went, hmm. And it sat there for a while and it moved around here and there and it would show up here and there. And finally, I thought, I was having to have surgery again. And I'm like, oh, I was starting to have anxiety and was having a lot of health issues, ear-wise, and they didn't know what was developing in health-wise because of it just, I don't know, threw everything out of balance, I guess. And so I ended up um, talking to him for that reason. Well, he had gotten the full story from my surgeon. And he says to me, would you like to share with me what happened? I said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, yeah, I think you do. And I think you know why you're here. And I said, no, I'm here to try to get help so I can make it through the next freaking surgery. I said, I am starting to develop these weird fears. Like, I didn't have a problem with needles. I probably could have drawn my own blood if I needed to. I didn't have a problem with any of that. Surgeries, I loved all of it. Now I can't stand the look of any of it. Medical tools, blood, any of it. And I need help to get through these next phases of whatever I have to go through. And he said, okay, let's start there. And so we did. He taught me some self-hypnosis techniques as far as, what words would help relax me and things like that. And I'm like, wow, I have some control over this. This is interesting. This is kind of cool stuff. And then he says again, you want to tell me what happened? And I said, no. He says, I study near-death experiences. I said, so I've heard. I think you had one. I said, well, I guess I was dead. I wasn't clinically proven dead, but I saw my body laying there and everybody thought I was dead. And I was clearly not in my body. He said, oh, so you did have an out-of-body experience. And I'm like, oh, yeah, well. So then I tell him the story. And he says, this is fantastic. This is fascinating. I'm like, wow, for the first time, somebody is listening and thinks this is really cool, right? So then it became just the two of us. we're the only ones who could talk about it. So, yeah, until I decided eventually, my parents were like, you have got to go to college. You were going to be a vet and now you're going to be nothing. You have to go to college. And I'm like, oh, I think I'll show dogs. So I did that. And I was a dog groomer and whatever. I'm like, I don't know what to do. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do anything. We never know. And I adopted this attitude of what I wanted was taken away from me. And then on the other hand, we never know. It is a split second away, split second away. And none of us ever know. And I'm like, why should I plan? Why should I plan? Why should I do all of this? Why should I go to school? Why should I work that hard? What sense does this make? Well, eventually, I decided it was so bad. My mom was like, "How about if you just try a couple of classes at the community college?" That was Florida, by the way. We lived in Florida then. And I said, "I don't want to go to school." She said, "Come on. Why don't we start a couple of things that you like? What about an art class? What about English? You used to love writing, And I'm like, "No." So anyway, I ended up going, and then I'm getting A's in everything I like, F's and other things. And she's like, okay, come on. We're not going to keep paying for you to go to college if you're doing this. She said, I'm going to take a class too. I'm going to take something in culinary arts. I'm going to go to college with you. I said, this is ridiculous. I'm in my 20s by then, right? But it was so important that I went to college. And so I I started taking some classes and stuff, and I'm like, Mom, I gotta quit. I can't do this. I just can't do this. I stayed with the dog thing. Moved back to Wisconsin for family. And all of a sudden, one day I said, Mom, what would you think if I went back to school? She says, where? When? And I said, I'm thinking about this fall at Alverno College. And she goes, Alverno College here in Milwaukee? I said, yeah. She says, I think that would be fantastic. When can we go and look at it? And I'm like, I don't know. She says, you want me to take care of it? And I said, no, I'll set it up. So I set this up and I went for this tour and I whatever, a Catholic women's college. Like, and she's like, I don't care. You're going to school. Awesome. And so I start at school and I just loved it. It's this women's college that is competency based. So it's different than A's, B's, C's, and all of that. You have to do all these different things and pass these competencies to pass, and whatever. And I ended up going for art therapy, art education, love psychology, so major, in psychology. And then I also ended up liking philosophy. So I almost had a minor in philosophy. Um, but anyway, I just went through it kind of breakneck speed. And I had this nun who really took a liking to me. I mean, there are no accidents. There are so many synchronicities. And if we just pay attention, they're there. And I'm doing my art. I'm doing my art therapy courses, art for that. I'm having studio art too, because I had to have an art education component at that time because art therapy was so new. And that was the degree. And she said to me, out of the blue, now, this other psychiatrist, he's the only one I ever ended up opening up to about it. She says to me, what happened to you? And I said, why do you think anything happened to me? I just have a feeling. And I said, nothing really. Went on about my day. A while later, she says it again, and she says, "Yeah, are you going to tell me your story?" I said, what story? She goes, what are you doing here? I said, I don't know. I decided I wanted to go for art therapy. And she says, why? So I don't know. I want to help people. I wasn't sure what to do. And I think I found it. I always loved art. Uh-huh. Okay. She left it alone. And she asked me again. And this happened several times. And she says to me, I see it in your art. I said, you see what in my art? I'm painting big florals. I'm painting all kinds of stuff. And I take little things like this drawing of a cockatiel. a little bird, and in a vase, and I turn it into something that's like, 5 feet by, 4 feet or something, and stuff. So I take all these little things, little flowers, and magnify them. And I'm like, what's that got to do with it? She goes, I'm talking your art therapy work. I said, I don't even have you for art therapy. I had her for art history and some studio classes. And so I'm sculpting. I had her for ceramics, and I'm sculpting this face in this vase. And it was of the man I saw. And she saw it as Jesus, right? I still didn't know who this guy was. I never put two and two together. And she sees it and she says, are you going to tell me now what happened to you? And she goes, so you're not Catholic? And I said, no, I'm not really anything. She goes, are you atheist? I said, what's atheist? Not believing? Nope, can't say I'm atheist. And, she says, it's time for you to tell me your story. I said, it's not. It went on again, and this went on a while. And she eventually she said to me, um, or we were walking down the hall together, and I stopped because there the man I saw was on a painting that somebody else did, and it said Sister somebody. So I knew she probably knew her. And I said, who painted that? And she says, well, Sister so and so. And I said, I need to meet her. And I just felt such like urgency. And she said, why? I said, oh, I just need to meet her. I love that piece. I really need to meet her. And she says, you're going to tell me your story. And I said, okay, I'm going to tell you my story. And I told her, and first she says, why do you need to meet her? And I said, because I need to know who that man is. She obviously knows him. And she laughs. She laughed out loud and she says, I know him too. And you do too. Well, yeah, you're right. Now you're going to tell me your story. And my dear, please meet Jesus Christ. And I went, what? And I was thinking, but I was thinking out loud and I said, why would Jesus have come to me? Jesus? Huh. And I could remember at that time seeing this old children's Bible somewhere, like when I was maybe 2 or 3. And it was weird, like things coming back to me. And I said to her, so this is what happened. And I told her the story. And she said, that is beautiful. She said, that is beautiful. And it's real. And I said, but now I have a lot of questions. And I think I have philosophy really interested in what's going on because we were talking at the beginning of this class, and he was asking what people were doing there, what they were going to become, what they were, whatever, what life was about for them. Oh, I'm a such and such major. I'm a blah. I'm going to do this. And I said, how do we know that this is life and this isn't really death? It's a lot darker than what I would consider life. There's much less love here than what I would call life. And he said, now we're talking. And so philosophy department was very interested in me as well. And they're like, what happened to you? And I'm going, nothing happened to me. So anyway, eventually, it kind of got around. And so this nun really took me under her wing. And she became my mentor, a really good friend, and a really good role model. And she takes me back to her office and she hands me a book, and it's about near-death experience. And I read it like like that. And I was like, I didn't know this existed. And she says, yes. And I have another. And she gave me another. That's all she did. Gave her that one back, took this one, read it again, came back the next day and went, wow, wow, I want more. And she says, no. I said, what am I supposed to do? You know a lot more about him than I know. And do I go to church? Do I become Catholic? There's a chapel here at the college, right? Do I go there? She says, no, 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 you don't. No, you don't. She sat me down in her office and she said, You go into your heart. You go into your artwork. Allow your art to speak. Art is the language of the soul, and you're finding that out.
That is
Allow it to
such
be,
powerful.
yes,
So
allow it to be sacred. And I'm just like, okay. But I was like, let me go here and let me be taught to do. So yeah,
I love that message about remembering our essence, if you will, and the
yeah,
kingdom of God is within, and we
yes,
don't have to look outside of us. That is just so beautiful.
yes,
Like you said, so much synchronicities in life, and you were at the right place at the right time. And I love the persistence of the surgeon also, who realized you left him thinking,
right.
and he came around and talked to you, and it's just so beautiful, Tammy.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love the art in the back.
Oh,
And
thank you.
so so from wanting to be a vet to doing the artwork, how did life change for you?
There's a richness in art. I always loved art. My mom was an artist. And I always loved it. Um, but I really loved it when I went to Alverno because I was able to try lots of different things and had some really incredible instructors from the art point of view. And then the art therapy. So learning how to be basically a therapist or psychotherapist, but embracing the art process. And for me, when things really changed, I was working, I actually did an internship when I was at Alverno at an adolescent treatment center for boys, adjudicated boys. And I was um, there for quite a few years. They actually made a place for me. They created a job for me to stay. So I became an employee. And I loved it there. But one thing, these kids were so horribly abused. Some of their stories were just like beyond me. And I would be holding this container and grateful for the art because talk therapy wasn't cutting it. That's why they were referred to the art therapy part of it. And it was just unbelievable. And I'd sit there and I would, in my own way, pray that I would be given something more to help them. And so it was really about helping these kids. Like, why should they have to go through it again, right? In something like talk therapy in order to heal it. Some things didn't make complete sense to me. And so the art actually, did give them something else to engage in and gave them a way to connect internally with who they were at that time and who they were becoming. And then I started getting sick, really ill, and everything that would come back to the head trauma. So it's because of the accidents, because of the accidents, because of the accident. And they would try to medicate me or they would try to do something, some kind of therapy, whatever, to, stabilize symptoms, right? And then I was super sick. I was environmentally ill. I could barely go outside, like to stores and things like that. On good days, I was living in Florida again at that time. I could maybe go to the beach or something like that in nature, going into stores where there were fragrances, where there were cleaning products, all that kind of stuff, chemicals, anything unnatural, my body couldn't tolerate. And I ended up having an allergic reaction that was so bad, and I I ended up not being able to breathe, and my throat swelling, and I'm trying to get air, and I'm trying to get water, and I'm trying, whatever. And at that point, that was really the first time that I had said, Jesus, I know that was you, and I'm ready to come home. I can't do this anymore. I can't. And I was, now I know, in complete surrender. And um, I I asked for help. I'm like, either lead me in the right direction, help me find the right doctor, something, or take me home. And the next day, I'm at my easel and I'm painting. And for the first time, I was painting an angel. I had never painted an angel before. And Archangel Gabriel appears next to my easel. And I was like, whoa. Now I thought, after all the training to be a therapist, right? Diagnostics and such, I thought for sure I had lost it. I thought for sure I needed psychiatric help that they thought I did years ago. And my husband at the time, I said to him, if I, this is what I saw, this is what happened. I don't know what's going on, but if I start acting really strange, just take me and get help, right? I don't know what more to say, and I'm thinking schizophrenia, I'm thinking, whatever. And Archangel Gabriel said to me, he was so gentle, so loving, and I felt the energy that I felt when I was out of body. And Gabriel said to me, would you like to learn to heal yourself? What choice did I have? I was backed into a corner. I was out of options. I had been to so many doctors and doctors telling me, you shouldn't be in this office, right? I'm like, thank you. Then I finally found some alternative type people. They would do muscle testing and things for supplements. Oh, yeah, we can help you. We help everybody. We don't know what to do for you. It's like I was out of option. And I said, yes. The next day, Saint Germain and Archangel Gabriel showed up and they said, we're going to start teaching you how to heal yourself. And for 3 months straight, 3 months, I mean, daily, rigorous training with the divine, Jesus being one of them. So I got to see him again for the first time
Wow.
since the accident. Yeah, yeah. And that was amazing. That was like a pure homecoming, only here I am in body. And so it was a little different, but it was fantastic. And I'm like, this is real.
So how did training go? Downloads
I called
or
it, yeah, I called it the Angelic Training School. They literally would talk to me about it. So they taught me visualization. They taught me, they reopened everything. So like I'm seeing, one week was about everything that I'm seeing, third eye wise and how I'm processing this and what the pineal gland is all about. And then hearing what hearing is all about and how we hear versus how we think we hear. And then the clear knowing and the clear feeling and all of that. And then I also have smell. There are times that I like can smell cancer and smell bacteria and smell different things or different fragrances for different people, like mediumship wise and stuff. And so there's that faculty. And so they're teaching me intuition first so that I could honestly probably communicate with them. And and then they're teaching me about light and dark, all of this. So it literally was like I was in these classrooms. And there were times that they would take me places like to the records and to different places. Um,
meaning the
and
Akashic records?
yeah, yeah, the Akashic records, and we have other ones too where we have different blueprints stored and different holographs and all of that. So they took me to all these different places, showing me different components of the soul and how the soul incarnates and all that kind of stuff, and taught me visualization, whatever. And one by one, the illnesses went away. And then they had me start doing things like going to a store, and I'm like, I can't go to a store. They're like, you can go to a store. So I'd go to the store and my husband would go with me and I'd be like, oh my God, I'm not reacting to anything. And one time oh, yay. And I'm literally going, woo, down this candle aisle because there's no way I could walk anywhere near a candle aisle. And, people are like, wow, what's she on? But I was just filled with life because I was getting my life back. And now, my imaginary friends were coming forward again. And so, yes, they taught me through downloads, they taught me through actual, this is how we visualize, this is what happens. Um, and then, yeah, within 3 months, I was healed. I was healed of everything, everything. And I had such felt like I had such incredible knowledge, that I really didn't know what to do with. But after I was healed, all of a sudden there were lots of angels and masters and Jesus, because I met all different individuals through them, who I now call the Divine Collective. And um, Jesus asked if I would um, teach it to others. And I said, I don't know how to do that. And I'm a therapist. I don't think I can. Licensure wise, I'm licensed, and that would not be in my scope of practice. And I don't feel like I can do that. Of course, you can do it. You're meant to do it. I'm like, okay. So I started slowly, and people wanted it. And I'm like, whoa, okay. So I'm quick putting a workshop together. And then I try it as like a 3 day immersive kind of thing. And then I tried it as an 8 week kind of thing. And then I tried it as a 6 month kind of thing. And it just kind of kept building from there. So yeah.
That is just amazing. Are
Yeah.
you are you in constant communication with these angelic beings and
Yes.
celestial
Yes.
beings, including Christ?
Correct. Correct. I would say, the majority, honestly, well, it's all of them, but it is my soul, right? So my work has progressed so much. I called it divine coding, what I did, and I started attuning people, kind of like a Reiki attunement, right? And then I realized it was like getting polluted. So everything forms a collective when there's more than one person involved. And um, so like Reiki has a collective energy. Divine coding started forming its own divine collective energy. And I'm looking at it going, what is this? I'm not sure that I like this. It's not as pure, right? So went back to like the prayer meditation kind of stance that I did back when I wanted more for the boys, right? Wanted an easier way. This healing is definitely an easier way. And I I ended up coming up with a way to awaken people. Now a lot of people are doing that, I think, but I basically am helping people remember who they are, because we all have everything we need within us. We all have divine connection, unless we are dark that's incarnated. We're light beings, and um, there are a lot of us out there, and yeah, we're all connected. So yes, I am constantly in contact with my soul, with Jesus, with God, with angelic beings. I mean, there are several hundred, actually a lot more than that, because I have a few different um, groups of angels that we worked with, and there's probably a few hundred actually in each one of them. So there are a lot of beings. And then I also have representatives of the Pleiades and the Syrians and the Arcturians, and you know what I mean? So that there's a lot of different divine beings that are involved in the divine collective. Yeah.
That is that is so profound, Tammy. And I like how it seems like the message you are getting your whole life is to look within, and that is what you are teaching now. So thank you
Yes.
for sharing that story, your NDE, as well as what you do. How can people find you if they want to connect with you and your
Um,
work?
Yeah, we're currently in the process of creating a whole new um, platform, I guess, if you will. But currently, my website, tammyandersen.com, is probably the best way.
I have three questions for you. What brings you joy and laughter these days?
Um, I think nature, little kids, stuff kids are doing, and animals, stuff animals are doing, I think is huge. There's always joy in art. So, in connecting with the divine beings, knowing that there's something more, I do think we have to be careful, though, that we're not just living there, right? Because we are humans having the human experience. And, there are people who will meet me and they'll see Jesus. And I don't embody spirits. I don't allow spirits to embody me. Jesus has a few times. He's the only one. But still, I that's not a thing. I'm a rapid trance channel. I am in communication with them, right? But I have my boundaries. And And there is, this whole idea of like spiritual bypassing, like using spiritual information and spiritual stuff to not feel and not experience. But they remind me, you're human. You're still human in a human body. And, because I'll be like, no, wait, I know something about this. I'm getting information, but not enough. And they won't tell me because they're like, this is your human experience. I have to live it, to know it, to learn it, to experience it, to understand it, to learn from it. And so just like everybody else. And, I think that's a misnomer a lot of times with this work. And yeah, so we're human and we have this, and we can be very much embodied with it, which is beautiful.
What would you tell young Tammy who's about to embark on this wonderful adventure?
Depends on what time frame. Don't bother thinking you're going to be a vet. Get into art sooner. I was always into art, but not seriously. I didn't take it seriously at all. So, I mean, I was even quoted at Alverno for somebody who became my best friend at college. She was actually older and went back to school, and she said to me, "Oh, are you going to be are you an art major too? You're going to be an artist?" And I go, "Oh God, no! I don't want to be a bum." Yeah, okay. So, be more open, be more loving, be more embracing, and don't close anything down, no matter who tells you to.
What feels most important to share that we have not touched already?
You have everything you need within you, and your body knows how to heal. So, if you are dealing with physical problems, if you're dealing with emotional, mental health issues, if you're dealing with spiritual stuff like dark energy attacks and things like that, you have everything you need. You have everything you need. You just have to remember who you are. And I can tell you that your soul isn't dark. Your soul isn't having negative thoughts. Your soul isn't hurting. Your soul isn't sick, right? And so if we can bring that energy in, you can learn to use it, and you can learn to heal, and you can learn to communicate. You can learn this stuff too.
Thank you very much, Tammy. And thank you for
Yeah.
spending this time with me today. And I hope everyone enjoys this as much as I did.